Hello everybody, welcome to IndyCar on the 21st of August. I'm Gordon Ross. Yesterday when I was presenting Scotland at 7, we were talking about the issue of the Electoral Commission and whether or not the UK Electoral Commission has any business interfering in the next independence referendum. We also reported that the Chief Executive of the Electoral Commission, when she was directly asked whether she and the Electoral Commission were happy with the existing question on the independence referendum, which was the one we used in 2014. Should Scotland be an independent country, yes or no? And she said yes, they were quite happy with that question. There was no issue with that. There was no need to revisit that particular question. So that was one of the major scare stories that was published in the UK media yesterday, already debunked and already turned out to be utter nonsense and a complete deflection. However, the sudden interest of the Electoral Commission in the independence referendum signals a new stage in the process, which is acceptance. The British government has now accepted that there is going to be an independence referendum after polls from Lord Ashcroft proved that the Scots do have an appetite for independence and they do want an independence referendum and they do broadly support independence in general. So all of the assumptions and the lies that were being spread around by the media and particularly by Ruth Davidson and the Tory party have now been exposed as fables, complete fabrications. There is a strong appetite for independence now, and there is also strong support for Scotland to become independent. So the question now is, when is the referendum going to be held? And for obvious reasons, the SNP cannot come out and say right at this exact moment when that will be, because there's too many things can still happen in the time between now and the 31st of October. And remember also that the 31st of October is the last date that we can leave. It's not the actual date that we will leave. The UK government can choose to leave the European Union at any point in the next few weeks. They could leave early, in other words, and totally defeat all of the efforts to stop no-deal Brexit from happening. However, there's another couple of things which need to be said here with regard to the Electoral Commission. There is no need at all for the UK Electoral Commission to interfere in the Scottish independence referendum at all, because Scotland has a democratic government already, and a democratic government in any country is quite capable of setting up its own arm's length commission, and that should be an independent body. Now, we know that the Electoral Commission of the United Kingdom is not an independent body, otherwise it would not be attempting to slow down the process of the Scottish independence referendum as it is at the moment. They are trying to introduce all kinds of hurdles, and as I think as Craig Murray put it yesterday in his column and this morning, they're trying to put the handbrake on the growing momentum for Scottish independence by interfering and saying that we'll have to wait 12 months or 9 months after the legislation goes through Holyrood before we can announce the date of an independence referendum, and then we'd have to wait another further 12 weeks for there to be a statutory period in which to hold a referendum, all of which is nonsense, because none of these things are necessary at all to hold a referendum perfectly legally. The conventions, shall we say, the way things are done conventionally in the UK is one thing, but these are not rules. And as they say in Pirates of the Caribbean, they're not so much rules as guidelines, because the British government sets out rules and regulations in such a way that they aren't rules and regulations. They can be bent and broken and changed at will. And this is how they managed to control the UK for so long, because they have the ability to both change the rules at will and change the bodies which make the rules at will, and also have other brakes on anything that they don't like which threatens the union. So they can put more and more hurdles in the way of anything that legitimately seeks to end the union of the UK. Now, bearing that in mind, that brings me to the Northern Irish question. And as you know, Boris Johnson is heading off to see both the leaders of France and the leader of Germany, Merkel and Macron, in the next few days prior to a big summit of the G7, where he's expected to speak to Donald Tusk and others from the European Union. Now, while Boris is over there, he has said, and his press releases have stated, that he wants the backstop, the Irish backstop, removed. This is the piece of, this is a precondition from the European Union for a deal, which says that in order for the United Kingdom to exit smoothly, they must accept this backstop, which states that until the United Kingdom comes up with a solution to the problem of a physical border, which would break the Good Friday Agreement, the European Union wants to keep regulatory parity. They want the part of Northern Ireland, they want Northern Ireland, I beg your pardon, to remain effectively inside the European Union's regulations, even though it's not in the EU, so that Northern Ireland and the Republic can trade across an open border. And that would create what they call a border down the Irish Sea. Now that's a border between the European Union and the UK. Now there's no reason why that can't happen except for one, and that is the Democratic Unionist Party, who are the smallest, well not the smallest, but let's put it this way, they represent only 1/3 of the population's views in Northern Ireland, and yet because of the unfair first past the post system and the fact that the opposition was split in two in Northern Irish politics, means that the DUP gets to represent Northern Ireland's interest even though they're working against 2/3 of the voters. Now, in Northern Ireland, a recent poll has stated that 60% of people in Northern Ireland are in favour, broadly, of staying in the European Union, or if they can't do that, staying inside this regulatory framework, pardon me, and having a border in the Irish Sea. Now that means that the actual people of Northern Ireland want to remain able to trade across their border. I'm not saying they necessarily want to stay in the EU, but they've said that they want no fixed border across the island. They want it to remain open, and they're happy with that. They don't see any problem with that. The only problem comes from the Democratic Unionist Party, who are scared that this creates a precedent, which means that one part of the United Kingdom, i.e. Northern Ireland, has some kind of advantage over the rest. Now that's true, it would have, but it is a solution. And as long as the rest of the United Kingdom accept that Northern Ireland is exceptional because it has to maintain this peace treaty, then all would be well. The trouble is that that is not what the Tories are proposing to do at all. They're proposing to get rid of the backstop, and that means that there is no guarantee that there will not be a border erected. Rules of the World Trade Organization, and if the United Kingdom is serious about becoming a WTO trading country, then there must be a hard fixed border between that WTO country and neighbouring countries, because that is one of the rules of trading in the WTO. There has to be fixed borders at which border checks can be done and at which taxes are paid. And if that is the case, then that breaks the Good Friday Agreement, it breaks the peace treaty, and could reignite the Irish troubles. Boris Johnson knows this fine well, and what he's proposing to do can never be accepted by the European Union. So what I'm telling you here is two things. First of all, with regards to the Electoral Commission, that Scotland doesn't need it, because all of the questions regarding Scottish independence were settled before the 2014 referendum. They were agreed by the UK Electoral Commission, and there is absolutely no reason on earth why we would have to revisit them and slow down the process of a second referendum. It is only the UK government trying desperately to slow down the race towards independence at the point where the momentum is at its greatest. I don't think they'll be able to do it. The Scottish Government, I believe, has the legislative power to create its own arm's length Electoral Commission in parallel and very similar to the one in England, which would make the same kind of choices, and which would arbitrate, which would look at the way the questions are phrased and so on in the future. That would be part, I believe, of the new legislation on referendums in Scotland, because it would have to be. The Scottish Government would have to create a separate body which could adjudicate such things. Otherwise it could never be fair, and it would not stand up to scrutiny. So At the moment, we're in a situation where the British government now accepts that there is definitely going to be an independence referendum, and they accept, because they have not said any more about it, that there is a large percentage of the Scottish population who are in favour of a referendum, and a percentage of majority in favour of independence itself. Now, those two things they cannot now gainsay, they can't go against. So they're trying every other possible method to slow it down, and that is what this nonsense about the Electoral Commission is all about. It's not going to happen. Both Craig Murray and Peter Bell, writing today, have both said the same thing. There is no need to get the Electoral Commission re-involved in something which was already settled in 2012 when the original referendum rules were set out, and there is no reason to change the question. Other people have suggested that we should change it to should we leave or should we remain in the United Kingdom. No, we don't need to visit that. And if the UK is unhappy about the question, well, tough. They chose the question. They were the ones whose Electoral Commission decided that that question was fair. And it's a bit late now for them to be coming out with all the sour grapes. Remember, they won on a negative campaign of no last time, and they have nothing to complain about. Okay, that's about it for today, but just putting a couple of these ridiculous stories to bed this morning. Scotland will have its referendum. We can have our own electoral commission. We do not need to abide by the ridiculous rules set out by the British Electoral Commission. By the way, one thing very important that was pointed out by Craig Murray today, which I think is worth mentioning, and that is the postal votes in the previous referendum. The Electoral Commission insisted that they be mixed up in with the ballots that were already cast. And then immediately after the referendum, they were all to be destroyed. Now that is a very, very suspicious thing for any electoral commission to do. Why destroy the evidence of the count immediately afterwards? In any other country, those votes would have been kept in case there was a need for a recount. We were denied the possibilities of any recounts, despite, well, dozens of examples of blatant vote rigging, which were recorded on film, which were recorded when people found large quantities of yes votes in rubbish bags on the street. All kinds of odd things happened, but of course we couldn't revisit it because the English Electoral Commission destroyed all the ballot papers immediately after the vote. So there are some very serious things that we need to consider here, and one of them is we do not let the English Electoral Commission anywhere near this next referendum. It's very important that we do that. Also, postal ballots should be kept separate. They should be kept after the count, and all votes should be kept after the count in case there is a need for a recount. That's fair to both yes and no sides. Both would benefit. So there is no reason for any Electoral Commission, be it Scottish or UK, to deny that simple piece of regulation when it comes to a referendum. Anyway, that's about it for IndyCar for today. I will talk to you again tomorrow, and of course I'll be at Scotland at 7 on Thursday night. And speaking of Scotland at 7, just wanted to remind you, Scotland at 7 runs entirely by donations. It relies almost completely on you, the viewer. Now, many of you I know watch the show for free, and we will always keep it free to air. But we ask you all, if you value this service at all, to become a donor. And to become a donor, you just need to go to our site and click on the button for donation. And what that does is it allows you to make a regular small donation of £5 a month, which is all that we require from our viewers to keep us running. And when we get enough viewers together who are all paying £5 a month, then we will finally be able to pay our bills and pay ourselves a wage. At the moment, we are struggling to pay the bills and we need your help. So there will be a more sort of organised appeal later in this week for further funding. I myself am about to put a couple of £100 into the donation box for Scotland at 7 and for Broadcasting Scotland in general. So if I can do it, I'm sure a few other people have got deep enough pockets to do the same thing. And this is what it's about. If we value our media, then we should be prepared to pay for it. Instead of paying your BBC TV licence, how about using half the money to support the free media in Scotland that's not directed by the Conservative Party? I'll see you later. Bye-bye for now.